Good morning. It's Bernard Nomberg with another weekly episode of NOMBERG Law Live. And this week I've got my friend Tom Campbell with the Campbell Law Firm. Good morning, Tom.
Glad to be here.
Thank you for making some time for us. We're going to be talking about what Tom and his firm does best. And part of that, they have a multifaceted firm, several members of the firm with over 100 years of experience. But part of what we're going to really talk about is the pest control litigation and what they do so well. But before we really jump into that, Tom, if you would take a minute or so and tell us about yourself and your practice.
Well, I'm a good North Alabama boy. I grew up in Florence, Alabama. Went to the University of Alabama Law School after serving a stint as a legislative assistant to Senator Heflin in Washington, which was a wonderful thing to do as a young man. And went to law school at Alabama and got out and went to work for a big law firm in Birmingham, Lang Simpson Robinson in Somerville, and made some great friends there and got some good experience. And pretty much concentrated in doing labor and employment law defense. And actually while I was in law school, we worked on a case for a pest control company where the plaintiff alleged that they had poisoned her with a termiticide chemical, a pesticide used for preventing termites. And we thought she was crazy because she said the guy came and just pressure washed the outside of her house with chemicals. And so I worked on that case some as a law clerk for that firm. And then when I started as a lawyer, continued to work on that case, and we tested the house, and it turned out that the amount of pesticide on the outside of her house and inside it was off the charts. And the insurance company was telling us, just do anything you can do to find a defense to this claim. And as part of that work, I learned that the termite chemicals that had poisoned this house had been taken off the market, and that the replacement chemicals would wear off fairly quickly. And the state regulator told me, he said, there's going to be an explosion of termite claims starting in the mid to late 1990s from these houses that are treated with these new chemicals. Mm-hmm. And so I just sort of decided at that time, I'm going to make a good living working for this big defense firm and learn as much as I can about termite claims and the termite industry. And then when the mid 1990s rolled around, I could represent homeowners, and believe it or not, that's what we've done. So it's sort of been a 32-year plan.
And you founded the Campbell firm in about 2000?
Right around
2000. And how many lawyers do you guys have right now?
Believe it or not, we have 8 lawyers.
Wow.
And
so you really
almost all we do is sue termite companies all across the country.
What is it that you have found with your experience, Tom, that makes these cases so emotional, so potentially explosive from emotional standpoint, from those clients that come to you and say, we think we have a problem here, how can you help us?
Well, several things, and it's a very rewarding practice. And one reason is because our clients had never done anything wrong. They're responsible homeowners or business owners that bought termite prevention service. They paid their annual premiums on a regular basis. And most of the time, the claims involve somebody's personal residence. And, we tried a case the last couple of weeks in Mobile. The house was worth maybe $50,000. We've got other clients with houses worth $4 million. But regardless of those two homeowners, their house is their castle, and it's their place of refuge, and it's the place they feel secure, and it's a repository of their memories. And so a lot of people have a very strong emotional connection to their homes, and for everybody, it's a substantial portion of their financial security. And so it is an emotional topic for people, and the injuries are usually very serious, and the conduct of the defendant is usually just atrocious.
So it's very personal in nature because it's typically their residence, their home. But are most of the damages, we're not talking about personal injuries necessarily, are we? We're talking about damages to the home itself, the structure.
Well, generally tell people, and certainly in Alabama, our cases typically have 4 components of damages. I call it the injury to the house, the injury to the property itself, the injury to the person, and there always is one. Miscellaneous damages for things like moving out of the house and living somewhere else while repairs are made. And then the potential for punitive damages in appropriate cases. And the way we focus on our cases is they really are personal injury cases. We think the component of emotional distress in our cases is really the thing that is the heart of the case when you get down to it. Certainly in houses where you have a substantial injury, and one of the things I've sort of learned over time when it comes to an emotional injury case is that most lawyers are sort of cold-hearted, and they don't want to talk about emotional injuries in a real way. They really don't. It's uncomfortable to sit around a conference room like this and talk to somebody about emotional issues. But what I've found is if your client is willing to express their emotional injury in a gut level, honest way, where the person who's deciding the case, whether it's a lawyer serving as an arbitrator or a jury or a judge, can psychologically identify with their emotional distress injury, they'll give you a lot of damages because they recognize it's a real injury. And to be frank, I didn't think as a young lawyer that emotional injuries were very good cases. And I was suspicious. Everybody knows the mother you see on TV, and she say, "Oh, I'm sorry, I lost my kids. I don't know how they drowned in a lake, and they're crocodile tears." And you find out 2 weeks later she drove them off into the lake. And you can fake an emotional injury to some degree. And I talked with somebody one time, and after I got a little bit older and lived life, somebody suggested to me one time when I said, I don't really need help with an emotional event in my life. And they said, do something for me. They said, write down the 10 most painful things that have happened to you in your lifetime. And I've almost died 3 or 4 times from illness.
Wow.
And only 2 of those things are on my list of top 10 most painful things.
Wow.
And the rest of them are emotional injuries. And most people, if they're honest with themselves, I've found will, if they made a list of their top 10 injuries in their life, they're emotional injuries. It's a death, it's a betrayal, it's somebody leaving them, a loss of some sort. And those are the injuries that are really real. And when you remind people of that, and then your client's willing to talk about their emotional injury in a gut level, honest way, some people identify with it. And when it involves their house, that basic gut level fear that they have is usually the fear of economic insecurity. And if you have a client who's willing to get honest, and you can see it in a jury, if that person is talking about a rational fear of economic insecurity that they have, and then they talk about that fear spiral that starts at 2 o'clock in the morning when they wake up worrying about
all that stress.
Yeah. And then they talk about the irrational fears that start creeping in. It's not just the emotional fear. And then it's, well, my wife was looking at this man at the cookout, a little bit funny. Is she disinterested? And then all the irrational fears start crowding in. And you start worrying you're going crazy. And if you get a client that's willing to describe that natural and normal thing that happens to all of us, people say, yeah, that's happened to me too. That's a real injury.
I was just getting ready to say, people can relate to those things.
Right.
And it really puts it a completely different perspective. And guys, thanks for tuning in. Who's there? Let's see. Mom's there, Tim Holderfer, David Hudson, Chris Levinson. Thank you guys for joining and spending a few minutes. We've got Tom Campbell, Campbell Law Firm here in Birmingham, and we're talking about pest control litigation, but more specifically, we're talking about how personal in nature these type of cases can be. And Tom, I know your firm You're all over the state and beyond the state. I know you've handled all types of cases. What I want to kind of shift for a few minutes and talk about, when somebody thinks that they have a potential case to bring to your office to evaluate, what types of things are you hoping that the potential client can bring to you from either an evidence standpoint or from a experience standpoint? What are those things you're looking for?
Well, the number one thing that is important for someone to do if they have a termite damage claim, or we also handle bed bug claims, the most important thing is to call us early or some other qualified lawyer in this field, because there's so many misconceptions about termites and bug problems. And people will unknowingly make bad decisions that destroy evidence and impair our ability to prove the most convincing case we can by waiting and trying to handle the claim themselves. The other thing I would say to people is, especially with termite damage claims, termites do most of their damage in hiding. So, you know, I had a client who thought he had a roof leak after there were substantial $200,000 worth of termite damage repairs done to a multi-million-dollar home. And he thought they just didn't put the flashing up right. And I knew the company involved. And I said, well, if you don't mind, let me come look at your house. And I went down and looked at his house, and the entire floor system of this house was eaten up with termites. They had made repairs to upper floors on top of a damaged floor system. And we were able to get involved in that case early, get the termite company to lie about whether there was, you know, whether they'd skipped the injury below. And we made it a lot worse by sort of laying behind the log and letting the termite company do its normal shenanigans. And they sort of put a noose around their neck and hung themselves. And ultimately, you know, that what the client thought was a $2,000 or $3,000 injury for us to try to convince the termite company to fix its flashing resulted in a $1.9 million arbitration award. And typically that's what I see. A termite company will come in and say, oh, Mr. Norberg, you're lucky you caught it early. There's just damage in your baseboard or just in your windowsill. And if you see damage to a baseboard or a windowsill, the way termites behave, that entire wall behind that is going to be eaten up.
You're finally seeing the tip of the iceberg, so to speak.
You are. And you know, typically, you know, I'll have lawyers refer me a case and they'll say, oh, you're not going to be interested in this. I'll handle it myself. It's a $5,000 repair bill. And we'll go in and do our investigation, and that winds up being a $300,000 or $400,000 case oftentimes, because the damage is much more extensive behind the walls. And the problem for the homeowner is what they want to do, and it's a normal self-defense mechanism, I think, is they are easy to manipulate at that point in time, because nobody wants to think that they have a disastrous situation hiding behind the walls of their home. And they want to think it's just a baseboard. But if they don't address it correctly at that point in time, it may be 10 or 15 years down the road before the walls start to crack and the shingles fall off, and they've got a major structural problem in their house because, you know, gravity's done its job.
It's kind of like, to me, it's kind of like going to a general practice doctor for an opinion. Oh, that kind of looks a little, but then you don't follow up with the specialist who will get to the bottom of the problem for you. I'm sure there's an equal type of a nervousness and a real stress to those kind of things. I want to say hey to Chelsea. Thank you for tuning in. Tom, let's talk a little bit about how do these cases typically, and that's a terrible way to describe it. You mentioned arbitration a few minutes ago, and I think you mentioned a settlement, but do these cases go to trial in front of a judge and a jury? Do they go in front of an arbiters panel? How do they play out typically?
Most of the time they wind up going to arbitration. I think back in the 1980s, there's a case that's famous for lawyers that deal in the arbitration area called Allied Bruce Termites versus Dobson. That's was really one of the early cases in the 1980s or 1990 that said that consumer contracts with arbitration clauses are enforceable. And so as a result of that decision, starting, in about 1990, termite companies routinely put arbitration clauses in their contracts.
Mm-hmm.
So probably 95% of the time these cases go to arbitration. I spent 10 years fighting consumer arbitration with some success.
Right.
And what I've found since then is that arbitration is really a good thing for consumers in these cases a lot of times, because these arbitrators generally are fair. They identify with the type of injury that the plaintiff has. Because we've done this so much, the fact that you don't get much discovery from the defendant in arbitration doesn't hurt us, because we've already got most of the stuff we need before we file a case. And we've done well in arbitration, and allows homeowners to get a recovery more quickly. And the result is more final. The defendants can't keep it tied up on appeal for years after you get a result.
Well, that's what I was getting ready to say. That sounds like, and I can remember coming out of law school, seeing no arbitration stickers that certain law groups had been put out because nobody wanted to lose their right to a trial. But what you're saying is, in these instances, there's going to be in the contract that you sign with the pest control company an arbitration clause that you agree to. But it sounds like it's an expedited, or can be an expedited way to get your issue in front of a decision maker more quickly than typically a trial by a jury may be.
It is, and one of the things that's happened, and that actually most lawyers don't know, is that in 2014, the American Arbitration Association, which is the organization that's picked by most consumer arbitration clauses, implemented a new set of what they call their consumer rules. Before that, the consumer rules provided that you couldn't get more than $75,000 in consumer arbitration. In 2014, they removed that cap and also shifted the entire cost of that arbitration proceeding, except for a $200 filing fee, to the defendants. So we can file an arbitration case for $200, go to arbitration, and we've recovered in that forum, just a couple of months ago, a $2.8 million arbitration award for somebody in consumer arbitration. And they picked panels for the consumer arbitration forum that are sort of reflective of the entire range of lawyers. I was actually preparing to file, based on my employment law experience, an employment discrimination case against the American Arbitration Association, because they seemed to think that you needed to have a middle-aged male appendage to be an arbitrator. And so we were going to sue, saying, you're not appointing women, you're not appointing African Americans. And it was an old white guy list of arbitrators. And as part of that process, they're appointing arbitrators, from a broad spectrum of lawyers. And what we see in our termite cases, one other problem for consumers was that the businesses are the repeat players in arbitration. But now with our pest control cases, there may only be 10 arbitrators in the Central South that will put up with hearing one of these fairly complex consumer cases. And so we see the same arbitrators over and over again in our cases. And that allows us to get past the bias where the arbitrator comes in and they think, oh, this is just a breach of warranty claim. There's nothing to this.
Well,
the real claim's a fraud claim, usually. And if we've had that arbitrator 2 or 3 times before, and they've seen the discovery fights, or they've tried one of these cases, they know it's a serious claim from the get-go.
Well, and your firm has established itself with the reputation. They know who they're dealing with. And Chris Levinson has a good comment here. he is with you when it comes to about the emotional damages in PI cases, about that appeal. And when you have the right client and the right experts in your case, emotional damages can sometimes be worth more than the physical damages. And this also goes, I guess, Chris, you handle the loss of consortium claims as well. So thank you for that comment. Tom, let me ask you guys, ask you, not you guys, let me ask you, what are the type of situations where you've had people come to you and they think they've got a case and they know they can hear the termites or whatever it is they're telling you, but then your team goes and investigates, but you really don't see necessarily the evidence that you need to go forward with one of those types of claims? What typically, if there is, can a client still, or potential client still pursue? You'd mentioned a breach of warranty claim, and there may be other types of, maybe it's a new home and it's a faulty construction, something like that. Are there other types of claims in addition to pest control claims that you've seen, but maybe not necessarily fall in that same pattern?
Well, your premise is wrong.
Mm-hmm.
When we go in and investigate these claims out of hundreds of times over the last 15 years, I would say there are probably less than 10 situations where the damage to the property didn't wind up being serious. I mean, it's literally where you see one little hole in the sheetrock, and we know what's going to be behind that wall. So when we take our thermal imaging cameras or our special probes that our experts use, or cut open the sheetrock or take the plaster down, what we find is the iceberg below the tip of the iceberg in the walls.
Mm-hmm.
So almost universally, there are serious problems behind the walls just based on the nature of the way termites behave.
Mm-hmm.
And, but where it is a rather insignificant injury, we just advise the homeowner usually to go through the process with the pest control company. And if it's small amount of damage, they'll usually fix it. We don't charge them a fee for that. We eat the cost of doing the investigation. But fortunately, for the firm, unfortunately for the homeowners, it does usually turn out being a disastrous situation.
One thing, I was watching some of your videos this week. Talk to us about termite swarm season. That's fascinating to me. So tell me, what is that?
Well, termites are, and I'll warn you that you're going to think you're an expert in termites after I give you this example, but keep listening after this. When we were in the 5th grade, probably, we had the ant farm experiment in school where you put ants in there and pieces of glass and you could see how the colony behaved. Well, termites are social insects like ants that live in the ground with a queen and reproductives, and that are the swarmers that go out during the spring to make new colonies. And they have workers and soldiers in the colony. And termites have that same social structure. The primary difference between the two is the food source and the biology. Ants have eyes, termites don't. Ants have a hard exoskeleton, so when they're exposed to the air, they don't dehydrate. Ants have a soft exoskeleton. When they're exposed to air, they dehydrate and die within a matter of hours. But one of the interesting things about the swarm season, which is when most people discover they have a potential termite problem, because termites are swarming in their house or out of the walls of their house on the outside, that colony is made these reproductives with wings, and they fly off and burrow down into the ground and mate and establish a new colony. But that primary difference between the fact that termites dehydrate and they don't have eyes, they literally forage randomly. So in the deep south where we are, you'll usually have anywhere from 12 to 24 termite colonies per acre. And each colony can forage for more than an acre to find the wood, which is the only thing termites eat. And so every house in the deep south in Southern California and Hawaii are within eating distance of probably 12 or so termite colonies. So if you don't have termite prevention in place at your house, the industry says in their advertising, and this is one of the few things they say that's true, is that it's not a question of if, but when your house is going to get a termite infestation. Unfortunately, they rarely put out an effective termite prevention system, and it's just a numbers game with them. They figure that people will let their contract lapse. They can get away with deceiving them when they find termite damage into thinking it's a small problem, or they'll come up with limitations in their warranty that trick the homeowner or their lawyers oftentimes into believing that that they don't have a valid claim beyond the warranty in the contract.
Are we more susceptible in the South versus other parts of the country to termite damage?
Oh yes, the deep South, really, if you took a line from basically Nashville, Tennessee to Little Rock down about 100 miles east of Houston up through probably the middle of North Carolina and south.
Oh, good.
That line the termite populations are extremely heavy. Then there's a moderate level up to about mid Ohio, and then above that they're sort of rare. But we've had a termite case in New York City, believe it or not, and tried a case in Michigan, the peninsula of Michigan, and so the termites are a problem really in every state in the country except for extreme North Dakota and Alaska.
Wow. Well, for those of you just joining us, we've got Tom Campbell, the Campbell Law Firm here in Birmingham. We're talking about pest control litigation, and we're getting close to the end of our conversation. I've learned so much already. Tom, how can people get in touch with your firm or get in touch with you if they have these types of cases or questions? Because I know you guys have a wide social media presence, and we'll put that in the comments section, how to get in touch with y'all. But tell the folks, what's the best way?
The easiest thing to remember is probably one of our websites is termitelawyers.com. Our firm website is campbelllitigation.com. We may rebrand that to Termite Tom soon because people in the trade call me Termite Tom,
right?
And I don't know why that has caught on, but people think of me as Termite Tom often, so it may be termitetom.com pretty soon, and I think we actually own that website.
Oh, that's great.
Direct you to one of the others.
That's great.
And then we're on Facebook as Campbell Law PC, and have a YouTube page that you can find by search, and we have a wide presence. We've got a toll-free number, which is 877-586-7582. Or you can call here, and
we'll certainly get you over to Tom's office. That's for sure. I want to welcome Eric and Bill, who just tuned in with us. As we get close to the end here, Tom, let's talk just for a minute or two about some best practices for homeowners. What are some suggestions, recommendations? What should people do on the proactive side before they find out the tip of the iceberg and end up having to call you?
That is an excellent question. And what I would say is do never, ever, ever get a baiting system. Those are gimmicks. They don't work. As I mentioned earlier, termites forage randomly. There's nothing in those bait stations out in your yard, if you have them, that attracts termites to those stations. They literally have to find them randomly, and they're going to find your house first. You need to get a liquid termite treatment. The best chemical on the market, Head and Shoulders, is called Termidor. It's got the same active ingredient as the tick remedy that you put on your pets, fipronil, and it comes out in some generics, but you need to get a treatment with fipronil-based termiticide. And then beyond that, it gets a little complicated. You need to make sure your pest control company is doing what's called a conventional treatment rather than a defined treatment. And that's going to require basically drilling holes in the foundation of your house and then attach slabs every 12 inches. But you need to let them do that. Even if you've got fancy coverings on your porches and patios, you need to let them drill through that. They can use a small bit and a larger bit to drill through bluestone or any other thing you've got covering your patios. But you need to get a full conventional treatment with Termidor. For example, We took the deposition of one of the top entomologists in this trade that advises the trade, wrote a book called The Business of Pest Control.
Mhm.
Last year, we took his deposition, and he represents one of the two largest termite companies. And I said, would it surprise you that your client is selling bait systems now in the Deep South? And he said, oh yes, because they're so grossly inferior to a liquid termite treatment. I can't imagine my client would be selling those again because they don't work very well.
Mhm.
And lo and behold, most of the companies are selling bait systems now. You should do whatever you need to do to get a liquid treatment to protect your home.
Guys, such solid advice from one of the very best in what he does. We want to thank you again, Tom, for such expertise and sharing it with us today.
So happy to be here.
And we'll make sure we put in the comments section how to get in touch with you and your firm. Guys, as we do every week, we try to bring interesting people sharing their areas of expertise with you. And I so enjoyed our conversation today. So Tom, thank you again.
Glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
As we do each week, each Tuesday at 10 a.m. Central, 8 a.m. Pacific, NOMBERG Law Live, interesting people in their areas of expertise. Hope you guys have a great rest of your week. Take care.